So, Infinity Train Book 3 is finally upon us and was released on HBO Max as of August 13th of this year. And with a new book comes a new set of main characters since the show is an anthology, some which we've met before with previous books, and some which we haven't. Book 3 follows the story of Simon, Grace, Hazel, and Tuba. We've met Simon and Grace previously in Book 2, them being secondary antagonists in Blake and Jesse's story. However, Hazel and Tuba are two entirely new and unique characters that we've only met in this chapter. And with these characters come new lore reveals, just as it did with the books previous. And since there's a lot of new train lore reveals, and today's theory discusses a potential one, this is a spoiler warning. If you haven't seen Infinity Train Book 3, Cult of the Conductor, and wish to remain spoiler-free, this is your only warning. Come back and watch this video once you're up to date on episodes 1 through 5. The show is no longer on Cartoon Network and is viewable exclusively on HBO Max. You can even get a free trial right now if you wanted to watch the first 5 episodes of the book, but if not, episode 1 is still available on the website right now for free. I'm including a link down below so that you have easy access to where it's posted. Though I did want to follow that up by saying that this video isn't sponsored, I just want to make sure that people know where they can watch the show. If you want to see a book 4 and onwards of Infinity Train, the best way to let Cartoon Network know that you want more is to watch it legally on HBO Max. And with that disclaimer out of the way, it's time for us to answer today's pressing question. Who or what is Hazel?
Hi, Tuba.
Hello.
And what's your name?
Hazel.
That's a very pretty name, Hazel.
There's been a lot of speculation leading up to Hazel's introduction, the most pressing being that of her identity. While she looks like an ordinary 6-year-old, Hazel and the other passengers have some key differences between them. While subtle, the main difference between her and the other passengers like Simon and Grace is that her number doesn't glow. This was actually something that had emphasis placed upon it as early as the promotional poster for the chapter. You can see a glow from Simon's number and Grace is covering hers, but Hazel has no green pigment coming from her hand. In previous promotional posters for the other chapters, the passengers always had a glow and their number was visible. While she does have the mark on her hand like every other human on the train does, it doesn't seem to behave in the same way or follow the same set of rules. It's consistently remained at the same number all throughout their journey, and as previously mentioned, it doesn't glow. It seems to act more like a tattoo or birthmark than it does a functional and working number. Now, there's been many theories as to why her number doesn't work, but episode 1 of this series already gives us an answer to that question. Hazel isn't a human. She's a denizen of the train, or a gnoll as the Apex refers to them as. And there's a lot of evidence to back this claim up, but it's important for us to start from the beginning. While a non-glowing and stagnant number can mean a variety of things, I think you'll find that with today's evidence, things seem to point in a certain direction.
I thought you said there weren't any passengers for at least 47 cars.
I don't know. That's what the number tracker said.
The Apex are a group of passengers who believe that the Infinity Train is a safe haven for humans and a way to escape from the terrors and trauma of the real world. Grace and Simon, who are the leaders and founders of the group, seem to have found their own sets of ideals that are opposite of the current and true Conductor, 1-1, even going as far to call him the false conductor and accuse him of stealing the position from Amelia. The Apex believe that rather than a sort of purgatory for you to work out your problems in, the train is meant to be a permanent paradise and way of escapism. They believe that everything on the train is meant to entertain and please them, rather than teach them lessons and help them work through their issues so that they can leave the train. In contrast to our prior protagonists, Tulip and Jesse, who wanted to go home, members of the Apex work to stay on the train and keep their numbers high. A high number is seen to them as strength and progress, whereas in other books, having a smaller number was the goal that they worked towards. The Apex keep their numbers high by traveling through train cars and causing havoc for the train denizens. Denizens of the train tend not to be entirely humanoid, but are subject to anthropomorphism at most times. These beings are made so that they can assist passengers as they work through their issues and provide companionship, but they also have their own goals and aspirations. They belong on the train since it is their home, whereas the passengers are meant to just be passing through. The group dehumanizes denizens and refers to them as gnolls. They're given the name gnoll due to their lack of a number. Because gnoll means 0, it is likely referring to the hierarchy that they've created in their society that's structured around their numbers. Since status is linked to the marking on your hand, having below a 0 would make you subhuman in the hierarchy that they've created. A low number is seen as weak, but having none at all is seen as worse. The mark to them proves that you are and labels you as a human. And this is proven to be true, as you can see the obvious distaste and mistreatment that the group not only had for Lake and Alan Dracula, but for Tuba as well. And this is why Hazel's potential identity is as important as it is, because it will challenge everything that Grace and Simon think they know about Knowles. The duo push time and time again that denizens of the train are incapable of having feelings and complex thoughts. They firmly believe that they only exist so that they can assist and entertain them, and that they have no autonomy beyond that. They lack any compassion or empathy towards anything that isn't a human, going so far as to kill and torture denizens that they come across during their raids. The most disgusting act of this is how Simon wheels Tuba in episode 5 of book 3, even after having gotten to know about her and her personal life a little bit better.
Teamwork begins with two people trusting each other. But you're no person.
Book 3 even starts off with a song about empathy and how you should always care about others even if they're different from you. This creates an incredibly impactful introduction to this season, as the contrast to what the song is saying and what's happening on screen is pretty disconnected. Which is why, from a literary perspective, Hazel being a denizen would make the most sense. Since they see denizens or gnolls as subhuman, it would be difficult to get them to empathize with one right off the bat. So if they were to have a denizen who they start out believing is a passenger, and who they travel and bond with under that assumption, they're more likely to have their views challenged and later changed when they find out the truth. But of course, I wouldn't come here saying this off of literary structure and patterns as my only evidence. There's plenty of in-show evidence as well, which I'm about to get into. Past Hazel's lack of a glowing number, she also lacks passenger status. What I mean by this is that she isn't classified as a passenger, at least not by Simon's detection device, which according to him will tell them whether or not there's a passenger in the car that he's analyzing. Prior to meeting Hazel in the jungle car, she didn't show up on the device. However, Simon and Grace did, as well as the rest of the Apex. This was brushed off by Simon and Grace as 1-1 turning off the functionality of her number to hide her from them, but the answer is likely more simple than that. If Hazel was a denizen who was created to look like a human, it's only natural that she also gets a number. This is because no humans on the train lack one, and would be a dead giveaway that she was a null. However, since this isn't a real number, it doesn't function like one. This means as well that she doesn't have human or passenger qualities beyond her appearance. So she isn't treated as a passenger by the train because she was made on and by the train. Her home is there, whereas the actual human passengers are meant to be passing through. This would also explain a few other things that have subtly happened throughout this chapter so far. The first noteworthy thing to mention is her conversations with Tuba and lack of understanding towards certain words and terms. Her being unaware of things could be attributed to her being a child, which is why it's so easy for Grace and Simon to brush it off as just that and not something else. In episode 2, Hazel has a few interesting exchanges with Tuba. The most eyebrow-raising is Hazel asking her companion if she's a kid, which to me is a bit more odd than the other instances. Most kids know that they're kids, regardless of lacking awareness of other common terms. The other exchanges that I found odd were how Tuba addressed and talked to Hazel. When Tuba was about to attack Simon for raising his voice at and becoming a danger to Hazel, Hazel stops her and exclaims that,
"You told me we don't hit!"
The we here is interesting. While it could be seen as Tuba instilling her morals within the little girl, she could also be referring to we as in denizens. Because as we've seen in prior episodes, sapient denizens usually do not fight back when they're being attacked by humans. And if they do, it's usually in self-defense or because they were provoked first. The only one who was seen to have done that would be Lake, and to the lesser extent Alan Dracula. Gomes seem to be in a classification all their own that doesn't fit into the null category, so it's kind of difficult to include and consider them here. And later when Grace is asking Hazel about her parents, she gets upset and says that she doesn't know anything about either of them. While you could chalk this up to Hazel potentially having amnesia or being an orphan from birth, it's also possible that she doesn't have parents and was created. After all, 1-1 does refer to the train as his mother often in book 1, implying that she created him along with some other denizens. Tuba may not have seen this question from Grace as odd, or even Hazel's answer to it, since she had kids of her own. Similarly, it's shown that other denizens are capable of having children and starting a family. A minor example would be Kevin Jr. from the unfinished car. Another would be the anthropomorphic badger child, who can be seen crying over Alan Dracula in the book 2 episode The Lucky Cat Car. It's entirely possible that Tuba is aware of Hazel being a denizen like her, she just empathizes with Hazel's lack of knowledge on her parents, since she knows that that denizens can and do have biological families. She knows that it could be entirely possible that her parents are out there, and that it wouldn't be very empathetic just to tell her that she doesn't have any because she's a null. More on Hazel's possible parents or creator later, but first we have more evidence to get to.
What about your dad?
I don't know.
What does she know?
Along with not knowing anything about her parents, Hazel also lacks a last name. While possible that she just doesn't remember having one, it also might be because it doesn't exist. Last names are important for someone entering a train, considering their tapes are labeled accordingly. While we don't know if Hazel has a tape or not, if she did, her last name would be included on it. Or full name rather, if all she really did have for her name was a first and not a middle or a last. In addition to not knowing her last name, Hazel later empathizes with Grace, stating that she doesn't know any kids either. Her insistence towards wanting to meet another kid to relate to is probably linked to her having not been human in the first place to have met and befriended one, making her feel alone and by herself. She probably just wants to meet and see someone who's like her. In that same episode, the puzzle also doesn't complete until Grace and Simon finish their dance. Hazel and Tuba finish before them and wait, but the door doesn't open. It's shown in past chapters that while denizens can help complete puzzles and move through doors along with their passenger companions, it ultimately needs to be the one with the working number that completes the puzzle. The Chrome car is one of the most obvious examples of this, with the trio's only exit being revealed when Tulip's reflection helps them to open the door. One and Atticus's reflections didn't play into this since they weren't passengers. Another example would be the Crystal car, where only Tulip's song was the one that mattered when it came to retrieving the key. If Hazel was an ordinary passenger, the door should have theoretically opened when she and Tuba finished their dance. But because it didn't, this implies that Grace and Simon are the ones who the null operating the puzzle was waiting for. And if that's the case, it's because Grace and Simon are passengers, while both Tuba and Hazel are denizens. While of course the rules seem to be a bit more complex than that, even those operating the puzzles seem to place the importance of passengers learning a lesson and continuing onward above denizens. A good example of this would be the episode The Lucky Cat Car, where the cat makes Lake's points matter less than Jesse or Grace's. So while Lake was still participating, she wasn't put as high a priority like they were. And while all of this I personally think is pretty damning, we haven't gotten to the biggest portion of evidence yet. At the end of episode 5 of book 3, Simon tells Hazel that he wheeled or killed Tuba. Hazel reacts to this by crying and having an emotional breakdown, morphing into what can only be described as a turtle person. So far in all of the books, there's been no evidence anywhere that would suggest a passenger is able to change their form. Perhaps if they were shot with the cannons that Amelia wielded, but even then it seems like it would be a stretch. Back in book 1, Atticus was transformed into a gome, but he is a denizen and not a passenger. And as we've seen with other characters such as Alan Dracula, shapeshifting isn't something new for those who are born and live on the train. While it could be argued that Hazel is just someone whose parents met and conceived her on the train, this still wouldn't explain her lack of working number and passenger status. Even if one was born on the train, it would be safe to assume that their number would be tied to either one or both of their passenger parents. And in this case, there would be no need for a fake number. Unless there's something in the future that proves this otherwise, that's what the current rules of the lore would suggest. And while it is possible that there is just some lore that we're unaware of that could be answered before book 3 ends, there's something else that already makes a surprising amount of sense. If you could, think back to book 1 for me. Back in book 1, Amelia was the conductor and 1-1 was displaced. Her forceful takeover of the train indirectly led to the Apex and their society being created, but that's not all that it led to.
You can't keep trying to recreate your old life. You have to learn how to live in this one.
Don't you get it? I don't want a life without Ulrich.
If you remember correctly, Amelia's goal was to stay on the train forever, living out the rest of her life in her glory years, at her old college campus with her late husband, Ulrich. And so once she took over the train, she began to attempt to construct her own personal car. She tried to reconstruct her old college campus, but one thing about her creations always made them a failure. Somehow, there were always turtles. It didn't matter how they were involved, but they were there.
Unbelievable. Again with the turtles.
You built that weird car with the turtles in it.
She was even the creator of the unfinished, or the turtle car. And in that case, while the buildings were unfinished and akin to a college campus, the denizens that lived there were also turtles. And if you remember what I mentioned moments prior, Hazel turned into a turtle. There's a reason why Hazel looks like a human and has a number. And it isn't just because she was a Gnoll created to look like a passenger in order to help give a familiar face to those who may be apprehensive about the wackier looking denizens that fill the train. Hazel was a failed attempt at creating a human for Amelia's false college campus, and possibly a failed attempt at trying to effectively resurrect Ulrich. Hazel's own outfit is even similar to that of Ulrich and Amelia's school uniforms, complete with a tie and dress shirt. Down to her attire, it seems like Hazel most belongs in that car. So while I believe that these instances and facts undoubtedly prove that Hazel is a Gnoll, further inspection of the evidence seems to also imply that her mother is Amelia. Though mother would be a very loose term, considering Amelia was her creator more than she was anything else. And judging by her wandering the train alone, it's very unlikely that Amelia was happy about her failed attempt at bringing her husband back. This could explain why Hazel is on her own and attempting to make a home with Tuba, who was effectively her mother figure up until Simon's unwanted and forceful intervention. It could also explain her want for human companionship, especially companionship from other children. She may not fully understand what a child is and just assumes that children are a species of Gnoll created by Amelia as well. If that's the case, she's in for a very rude awakening when she realizes that she's different from them after all. And while this is one of those theories that I've never been more confident in, there's still a large possibility that it could be proven wrong. Either way, I'm very excited to see where things lead. So if in the future you'd like to see more videos on Infinity Train, why not subscribe and hit that bell icon to get notifications of when I upload. Special thank you to my top tier patrons: Ambrose Rothwood, Brandon Nunes, The Lovely Ghosty, Kira Feek, Lee Taylor, and Zachary Ansley. Because of people like them, I can continue to make content like this. And I hope to see you all in the next video. Have an amazing day, guys.